Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage in the gloomy, rainy state of Maine today. But hey, we need the rain. We need the water. It's been a very dry summer. Somehow I managed to not burn my grass like sometimes happens if I mow it too often. So my non-mowing program, well, I kept it decent looking, but I didn't really have it, trimmed right up. But you didn't come here to talk about my grass or the weather, did you? Today I'm going to attempt to address the two subjects that I read about every day or hear about by watching videos or whatever on YouTube or you name it. When it concerns transmissions, and specifically today the Turbo 400, is what type of fluid should I run in my transmission and how do I convert my fill-in-the-blank four-wheel drive brake drum transmission or bolt-on yoke transmission to a slip yoke. So that's the two most popular questions I think it's probably asked, I don't know how many times a day. So let's take the fluid first. When I build a transmission for somebody and they ask me, which they typically do, what do I use for fluid? I try to get across my point of view by just simply saying, as long as it's clean and kept cool, the choice is probably yours. However, if it was mine, I like Dextron 3. All my opinions from this point forward, including the Dextron 3, is from my positive experiences. And my negative thoughts on other types of fluid is from my not good experiences. So everybody has an opinion. I'm not an oil expert, but I can only tell you what's worked for me in the past. So Dextron 3, always a good choice. I mean, it worked for GM all these years. No sense reinventing the wheel. Low viscosity tractor fluid you can buy by the 5-gallon bucket at your Rural King or Tractor Supply, whatever you got near to you. Make sure it's John Deere High Guard equivalent or Mobile 424. Those are both approved for automatic transmissions. It says right on the package. They also have standard viscosity, which is thicker. I like to stick with the low viscosity, so make sure it says that somewhere, or is John Deere High Guard equivalent. That's pretty much the benchmark you want to look for, so read the fine print. I have a few cases of Dextron 6, which is semi-synthetic, and what I've been told, again, not an oilologist, but synthetic fluids by nature are more slippery, and there's really nothing we want to do inside the transmission to slip. We want a clutch engagement. We want everything to grab. We don't need it, being extra slippery, which is a product of synthetic. In a street vehicle or something like that, it has other great properties, I'm sure. And you could probably run it in your race transmission. I'm sure many people do. It's way more expensive and just non-expense, I think I want to encounter, because the most important thing with oil is keeping it cool. A threshold you might want to keep in mind is you'll keep the transmission 200 degrees or cooler. You'll get a lot of life out of your oil. If you continually heat it more than that, 230 degrees Fahrenheit or above, you should be changing the fluid potentially on a daily basis. Depending on smell and color or just your opinion of it, but I don't think you can overchange it. So I don't care what you put in for fluid, no matter how super it is. If you overheat the transmission, you've done damage to the fluid. You need to get it out of there. And of course, you can only get half of it when you drain the pan. The other half's still in the converter, give or take half of the capacity. So you need to do this multiple times or on a regular basis. It should be, in a race transmission, maybe every time you change the oil, if you can get that much out of it without it changing color. So I don't like Type F. I worked on Ford vehicles that had Type F, and it was the nastiest stuff. I don't like the smell. I don't like how it turns to varnish. It turns brown. When the air hits it, we would literally bring in, Ford vehicles for a fluid change because the oil was burnt. You drop the pan, you smell that, you put fresh fluid in it, and it won't even move. Now, try to sell that to a customer. Hey, your car drove in here, but now it won't move. And this really happened in the 70s and 80s. So, not a fan of Type F. Some people run it. I just don't like it. Again, you could probably put it in your race transmission and run it for the rest of your life. That's totally up to you. The second most popular question is, how do I get to the point of having a slip yoke drive shaft in my Turbo 400? After the early 70s, you're hard pressed to find a Turbo 400 in a vehicle that had a slip yoke. They continued to use them in 3/4 and 1 ton trucks, which typically had a 2-piece drive shaft, so the front half had a bolt-on yoke. There's threads in the end of the output shaft, an O-ring which went in the counterbore. I'm not going to drive that down over the O-ring because I'll have trouble getting it off for demonstration purposes, but this yoke was fixed and never moved. The O-ring sealed up any oil that might want to escape out by the washer and the bolt. And that is how you're going to find most of your cores. So, to get to the point of a slip yoke, you have a few choices. If you did nothing and left the O-ring and happened, now this is the part that I'm not willing to gamble on, if you happen to get the right counterbore yoke with a big enough counterbore, now you saw the factory one hits the O-ring and I have to force it over there. Now this offshore copy of a Spicer short Turbo 400 yoke happens to be so big it fits right over the O-ring, so that almost gives you as much slip as machining off this groove. This one I just did, and I took off the first part that held the outboard side of the O-ring, the O-ring groove, and I just tapered the next part over, and now I get about 3/4 inch more slip. If you wanted to exactly duplicate the factory 2-wheel drive one, there's no O-ring groove whatsoever, and it will actually go down about 1/4 inch more. You could continue to machine this piece right here. However, I know from experience it's kind of a waste of my time, because by then the other end of this short yoke is already up against the seal. So if I take a few minutes right there in the lathe, I cover the ways of my lathe, and I just hold my cordless bench grinder on. I'll give you the up close. It comes out, if I told you I machined that, you would believe me. It comes out flawless because it's spinning, and I just hold the grinder in one spot. If I actually made a mechanical arm to hold the grinder, it'd probably come out even better. But it's a really simple way to cut this to make it happen. I was doing it on the lathe with a bit, and this is harder than the hinges of hell, as they say. And I destroyed a lot of carbides, or I had trouble getting any bit that would last. And I was watching a video about a tool post grinder, and I'm like, wow, why don't I just grind it for real? So that is my method. But we got a couple more things to cover. So let's take each conversion scenario one at a time. If you have a 4-wheel drive transmission, they made 3 different output shaft lengths on a Turbo 400. One of them is a 2-wheel drive shaft. So if you happen to get lucky, you could potentially do nothing other than adding a tail housing. The rest of them, you might as well call this the first piece inside the transmission you're going to install. If you looked at the blow-up schematic, this is all the way in the back. So complete disassembly to get to the output shaft, and then it's a simple matter of popping out a snap ring, changing over the bearing, putting on the correct output shaft, be it one you modified or an actual 2-wheel drive one, and you're slipping away in 2-wheel drive form. If you have a brake drum transmission, that has a tail housing that has 2 giant roller bearings in it, and that is not going to work. Your shaft is the right length. Your shaft is the threaded bolt-on yoke that you're going to find 90% of the time anyway. So you get rid of that giant brake drum and whatnot, unbolt the whole mess. It unbolts like a tail housing, take the bolt out of the center, throw that thing away. They claim they're valuable. I've thrown an awful lot of them away. and do your whatever you're going to do to the O-ring groove and put on a two-wheel drive tail housing, and now you're slipping away. No problem whatsoever. And I just covered originally, but I'll recap the bolt-on yoke transmission, the most popular one you're going to find. You're going to take the bolt out of the center, throw this away, and once again deal with the O-ring. Be it counterboard yoke, semi-successful. Guarantee if you cut off the O-ring groove, you'll never have a problem, or anybody else that comes along behind you, or get yourself an actual two-wheel drive output shaft. So this is my very simple procedure. I just did 3 in the last 5 minutes, all on the same battery on my cordless M18 Milwaukee. It comes out flawless. And I literally just hold it, if I can do this at an angle like this, and work on this, the first part of the O-ring groove. Then I just let it taper back. It naturally hits this while I'm grinding anyway. Again, if you wanted to take this part, you could to make it exactly like a two-wheel drive yoke, but there's really no need with the short yoke anyway. So that's it. We covered 2 subjects. When I started my channel, one, I didn't know I was going to do a lot of transmission content. I knew it was one of the things I was going to do, but that's pretty much my meat and potatoes at this point. And I went about it all wrong. I went about YouTube all wrong. I had no idea what I'm doing. I still don't. But I realize occasionally that I skipped over all the basics pretty much. So I'm trying to go back and hit a lot of stuff. And when I cover more stuff, even if I'm covering it for the 2nd or 3rd time, I'm trying to hit it from a different perspective, because most of the people probably aren't, transmission experts. They're watching this to learn, and I'm assuming way too much that, I'm skipping over important steps that I take for granted. So bear with me while we may cover a few subjects several times, but in the end, that and videos that are several years old, I got almost, this will be the 90th video, I think, on Turbo 400s, and I don't know how many total videos I have. Almost 1 for every subscriber. But we'll be hitting, again, more of the stuff I might have skipped over the first time. So I hope you got something out of this, and I'll catch you in a couple days. Take care.